So VCT Stage 1 of China is now underway. So let's talk about quickly what's happened in Week 1, what to expect for the next upcoming games, which start tomorrow. Which, speaking of which, twitch.tv/RyanCentral if you want to watch the games live. There's no English broadcast, so I'm trying to effectively do it a little bit. The games for China on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, starting at 10 a.m. BST. So you might be able to catch them if you're like in NA. It's quite late. But if you want to watch the games there, or at least catch the VODs, you can do so then. So let's start with Tyloo versus Bilibili. Tyloo at kickoff were the worst team based on performance. They didn't pick up a map. They got destroyed by some other teams around them, but they managed to get their first map win against BLG. And what a map. They actually dumpstered Bilibili 13-3 on Bind. Did it with two new players, a Flexin coming in from Trace, Aaron coming in from Nip, but also they moved players like HFMI, who was on the sort of initiator role, to Sentinel, and AAK, who was the Sentinel, to main duelist. Unfortunately, the hype for CN's equivalent of DFM didn't do what DFM did this week by winning the series. They got reverse swept by Bilibili on the next two maps, 13-6. For Bilibili, I mean, it was a rough start, even in kickoff, like losing to Wolves the first time. It was a shock result, but they did well to basically come back in this one. Wisey was back into his champs form that we saw at 2023. And for both these teams, I'd say that it's a lot of positive to take out of it. Like, it's a keep an eye on both of them to see what they're both cooking, because Tyloo, objectively the worst team in the league right now based off results, but they're starting to show a lot of promise on what made this team really good this time last year. So I guess we'll keep an eye on Tyloo, not necessarily looking like GE or Bleed levels of when it comes to how they're playing. Second game was Tech versus Wolves. This was a series where both teams surpassed community expectations at kickoff, and realistically, I think this is a playoff qualifying game for both sides, despite being in different groups. Unfortunately for Wolves, they had to play twice this week, and their prep wasn't as solid as they were hoping, realistically. Similar in the first series that Wolves played, they dumpstered the first map, played some incredible Valorant on the defensive split, but the other two maps and overall the map pool for Wolves just isn't strong enough, and they ended up losing out, despite a Luba, their controller player, 30 bombing in the two maps that they lost. They lost an OT on Bind, and then fell short on Lotus. It was the first time that they played it. Also, RB is still smurfing in China and continues to make me look like an absolute idiot because they said that you couldn't be able to do it. So DRG versus All Gamers. DRG were top 4 at kickoff, one win away from making Madrid, and they were playing up against All Gamers, who came out dead last, much like Tyloo, and like Tyloo, didn't pick up a map at all during kickoff. But All Gamers, it was looking like business as usual. They were 11-7 up on Icebox and ended up losing 13-11. A team that is constantly choking when it matters, but unlike Tyloo, All Gamers actually came back in this series and in shock fashion won on both Sunset and then Breeze. The second map was really close, but Breeze, it really looked like DRG had just lost the mental, and players like Spitfires had really found their form playing Sentinel despite him being duelist for the majority of this series. It's a little bit confusing there. Maybe they need to sort out the roles. They swapped Delby and Spitfires, who was playing Initiator and Sentinel, duelist and Sentinel, and it looked better before, so they moved it back for Breeze, and apparently that was enough to win it out in the end. But I think it's now just Tyloo that haven't won a series in China so far this year, and DRG, like I said, one win away from Madrid. This is a big hit for their chances of making Shanghai, and I can imagine that for a couple of the rotations they made bringing in Xion, their confidence isn't necessarily going to be quite there. So I'm a bit worried about DRG kind of falling off massively when it comes to form. Next up is JDG versus EDG, game of the week, no doubt. EDG returning from a rough campaign at Madrid, and JDG now with a new IGL of YH10, who was on Attacking Soul. It started off poorly for JD Gaming. They got 13-5 done ascent by EDG, who had also moved Kung Kung over to the KO role, and Smoggy was over on the Jet. And for the first map, it looked fine. However, the second map, where we still see Kung Kung playing the KO because it's Bind, JD actually brought that back and also went all the distance on split. Unfortunately, they lost 13-11, and really everybody from EDG, the fans, should be personally thanking nobody for having an absurd amount of 4Ks. But for EDG overall, the story is the same. The only thing keeping them ahead of close opponents is individuals shining in major rounds. But ultimately, other teams are starting to catch up. Like, if a JD Gaming team with a new IGL that have looked completely lost during kickoff and stages can scare Edward Gaming to this level, I dread to think what teams like FPX or Trace could even do, or even teams like Tech that are looking very good. I think Edward Gaming need to be very careful that they don't get embarrassed this stage. A loss is looming on them, I think. But as for the last two games, not really too much to go over. Day 3, Trace won the series against Nova 2-0 with Lil King's debut, who looked fantastic. Great addition for them. Nova, however, in the series didn't look too bad in moments. Lotus was a bit one-sided, but Ascent, which was Nova's map choice, actually gave like a lot of good ideas, and Swirl's debut for Nova was also pretty nice. I feel like Trace were like actually intellectually challenged here, which you can't say a lot for China, but Trace's firepower just wins out. Nova's chances of playoffs are quite small, but there's some good that they can take from this series that would go into next week. And finally, FPX are playing up against Wolves, who had already lost this week and ended up losing again. FPX playing life on the main duel list now, and Autumn on a flex role, played some of the best Valorant I've seen in China for a while. Like, they're coming up with some kooky strategies. Wolves couldn't necessarily keep up, and they even introduced stuff like triple controller on Lotus, and looked fantastic with some great ideas with how they're incorporating those free agents. But for Wolves, 2 tough opponents in the first week, and it really feels like the worst is out the way, but now that playing up against stuff like All Gamers next week, the chances of playoffs could be really dashed here if they're not careful, and we're only 2 weeks in, effectively. But speaking of which, I want to talk about pick'ems real quick. For me, JDG versus Nova should be straightforward enough. JD Gaming, like, whilst they look a little bit rough around the edges with some of the calling and the attacking side, and whilst I think Nova look good, I think much like Trace versus Nova, JD Gaming have this, like, firepower to stop Nova, who have a lot to build up to. Second game for FPX versus DRG, one of the Madrid qualifying games that we saw from kickoff, has to be going FPX's way with how they're playing. Not only did they have a great understanding on how to shut down Vukashu last time, so that's likely to be the same, but they found their own unique style of Valorant, and they're running with it. Like, they're confident to try out stuff, which a lot of teams did, like last year at Evolution, but it's only FPX that are now committing to playing Solo Initiator Gecko and all that stuff. Really excited to watch this series, but I think I have FPX winning. AG versus Wolves. As much as I'd like to say Wolves win, and I might be called a traitor for this, I think the rough start the Wolves have had, and AG's protocol's looking really crisp, the confidence being there, I'm actually going for like AG. I hope that I'm wrong on this, because I dread to think what an AG team with confidence could look like, but I'm still thinking that this could be a potentially solid series to watch, because it'll be a lot of fun, and All Gamers, they're not a completely tragic team. They play some good stuff, so it's a great test from Wolves to see realistically where they are. Trace versus BLG, this is the game of the week. I think watch this on Saturday if you can. Trace is cementing themselves as a top 3 team, and BLG have had rocky moments, but they seem to be coming out stronger. Remember that this was a series during like kickoff at play-ins where it went to all 3 maps. Whoever qualified would go to top 4, and it was actually Trace winning out in overtime on the 3rd map with that crazy defuse moment. So if any luck, we'll see this series sort of play to that level too. Day 3's games, DRG versus Tech. DRG playing twice. It's rough for them, especially with how last week went, and 2 opponents that are on the right foot won their first games. DRG did beat Tech at kickoffs the first time, but I think this rematch, I have Tech winning it out with how they're playing. And then finally, Talu versus EDG. Best team in the league versus worst team. EDG should win this, but I'm excited to see what Talu do against a scary opponent, and realistically whether EDG gets scared or not when it comes to playing up against a team like that. I don't think we'll get like a TFM versus T1 moment realistically, but at the same time, if there's a chance to get a shock win against Edward Gaming, I think now's a great chance for All Gamers. A lot to prove, and hopefully they don't choke and they actually play up to the occasion. EDG get a little bit scared. That might be the way to go for it. But thanks for watching. Like I said, tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, twitch.tv/RyanCentral if you want to catch the games, or catch them on this YouTube channel if you want to get the VODs. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.